Hello, my name is Liam Huggins, and I'm taking the side that building border walls is not generally positive for national security. I'm to define border walls as any physical barrier running along and separating international border. To start, I'd like to mention that there's been a long history of border walls in the United States before Donald Trump, and this is according to Christopher Klein. The border between the United States and Mexico stretches for nearly 2,000 miles. Approximately 700 miles of barbed wire, chain link, post and rail, and wire messing fencing has been erected along the U.S.-Mexico border. The United States began the installation of border fences to restrict the movement of unlawful immigration and drugs in 1993 when President Bill Clinton mandated the construction of a 14-mile barrier between San Diego and Tijuana. The Secure Fence Act of 2006 authorized the construction of 700 miles of border fencing and vehicle barriers, which was completed in 2011. Under Donald Trump, only 80 miles of new barriers have been built in places where there was none before. Currently, immigration at the U.S.-Mexico border is at a 20-year high, according to John Gramlich of the Pew Research Center. The U.S. Border Patrol reported nearly 200,000 encounters with migrants along the U.S.-Mexico border in July, the highest monthly total in more than 2 decades. The July figure is the highest monthly total since March 2000 and far surpasses the peak during the last major wave of migration at the U.S.-Mexico border, which occurred in May 2019. Deportations proceedings on the grounds of national security and terrorism have always been rare and have steadily decreased over the past 2 decades, according to data from Track Immigration, a non-profit information center on immigration ran by professors from Syracuse University. Deportation proceedings on terrorist or national security grounds, always an extremely rare event, have become even rarer. In the decades before 9/11, there were a grand total of 88 matters involving terrorism charges. From the 10 years after 9/11, there were 37 such cases. For national security, there were 384 before 9/11 versus 360 after. More recent data from 2020 shows just 17 out of the 1,290,000 individuals in the court's current backlog involve an alleged terrorism violation. An additional 79 are alleged to have committed a national security violation. These statistics show that despite a decade-long history in the United States of building walls on the southern border, they have done nothing to stop immigration from increasing, and that national security and terrorist threats have become an even more rare sight despite such an increase in immigration. Despite these statistics, there has been a growing trend of militarization of borders. This is according to Jones and Johnson. Militarization of borders is driven by the expansion of security as corporations compete to win funding for projects. Militarization of the border is a long-term process of state expansion in monitoring and regulating territory along with the mobility of citizens. In attempting to manage mobilities of capital, states are diluted into thinking it is possible to choose between good and bad mobilities by military technologies. Borders have become lines for the protection of privilege of a state. Border lines now serve to protect against the movement of individuals perceived as threats to the interest of the state. The militarization and privatization of border walls have had a negative blowback effect on U.S. citizens, according to Angela Davis in 2013. G4S is important because it participates directly and blatantly in the maintenance and reproduction of repressive apparatuses in Palestine, prisons, checkpoints, and the apartheid wall. G4S represents the growing insistence on what it calls security under the neoliberal state and ideologies of security that bolster not only the privatization of security, but the privatization of imprisonment, the privatization of warfare, as well as the privatization of healthcare and education. G4S is the third largest private corporation in the world. G4S has insinuated itself into our lives under the guise of security and the security state. From political incarcerations and torture to racist technologies to separation and apartheid, from the walls in Israel to prison-like schools in the U.S. and the wall along the U.S.-Mexico border. The deep involvement of G4S in the global prison industrial complex is helping to blur the boundary between schools and jails. Poor communities of colors are thoroughly entangled within the security state. Schools use the same technologies of detection as jails, and they sometimes use the same law enforcement officials. Angela Davis' insight on the wide web of financial projects undertaken by G4S shows how the methods to secure the border in the U.S. and Israel via our walls and security methods are being directly exported back to the U.S. schools and private prisons, which again are both financial partners with G4S, and just work to create a vicious cycle of violence that threatens our domestic national security much greater than those at the border.